Mr. Bison Flips!
Mr. Bison Flips! Mr. Bison Flips! Mr. Bison Flips!
Welcome back to Mr. Bison Flips. Today I want to do a video on the individual oral commentary in the IB literature course, and I'm going to focus mainly on higher level. The reason I want to do this video is because by far, excepting people asking me to do annotations of specific texts, requests for help with the oral commentary is definitely the biggest type of request that I get on this channel. So I thought I would do some basic overview guidelines for the IOC, and then if anyone requires specific assistance in some area, then I can probably provide that in a future video. So let's have a look roughly on how the IOC works and what the expectations are.
So let's start with looking at the basic setup of the IOC. So I am speaking now mainly about the higher level course, but obviously the commentary component is the same for the standard level as well in the literature course. So part 1 applies to both standard and higher level. Part 1 is the 8-minute commentary, where you will be analyzing an extract of poetry of 20 to 30 lines. Could be a full poem, or it could be an extract from a poem. You could theoretically have exceptions here if one of your poems is 31 or 32 lines, or maybe if you're studying sonnets by Shakespeare or by Keats, your teacher might choose to give you one of those, and they are dense enough and rich enough for you to elaborate on those for 8 minutes. But seek to practice with passages that are 20 to 30 lines, because that is the recommended length. And then follow the 8 minutes of commentary, you will have 2 minutes of follow-up questions where your teacher seeks to glean out the little things that you might have missed. They're trying to help you fill in the blanks, fill in aspects. You might say, let's go back to line 8 because you missed something important here. Or develop the richness and the wealth of your commentary so that you can get a few more marks possibly. Excuse me. In part 2, and this is high level only, you will have a 10-minute literary discussion where you explore one of the other 2 works that you have studied in part 2. In most cases, this is a drama and a novel, but in some cases you might do short stories, or you might have done some non-fiction writing. So whatever text you studied in part 2, one of those, and obviously it's a random draw, you don't know beforehand which of those 2 works you will be exploring. When it then comes to the focus of the subject matter in your commentary, there seems to be some confusion among students on what to focus on. The whole focus of your IOC should be on what is the purpose of this poem? What is the poet trying to say? And how is he or she expressing that? So how is the meaning created? That is your sole focus. So think of the text as a literary construct. So the poet has an idea that he or she wants to express, and has chosen certain literary conventions to express those ideas. So there might be influences on those, on how these ideas are conveyed from external factors. The historical context might play a certain role. If, for instance, you're Wilfred Owen and you're coming out of a World War I situation, there might be biographical background in terms of things that happen in your life that shapes your poetry. Or there might be clear influences from other works in the poet's opus. And you should try to include some of that to contextualize either this extract within the poem, if it's a longer poem, or contextualize this poem within the opus of the poet, so that you can show that you understand the entire work as it's meant to be. So that is the focus. What is the purpose of the poem, and how is meaning created? And particularly at the heart of it all sits that word how, in terms of literary stylistic devices that have been chosen to represent that idea. That is what criteria B is all about, right? What techniques have been chosen to convey these ideas. When it then comes to the discussion, the focus is of a similar nature. You want to focus in part on the subject matter. What is the plot, the characters and the ideas, but only briefly. Hopefully your teacher is not going to use questions to focus on those areas, but just use them as tools for you to show depth of understanding of the text. You also want to explore motivations. What is the purpose of the text? What are the central themes of the text? And what influences might there be for the writer in the creation of this particular text. Next, you move on, obviously, to construction. You want to make sure, let me rephrase that. You're not moving on next. These are the three areas that you focus on: subject matter, motivations, and construction. And you can weave these together in all your answers for each question that your teacher asks. And try to explore, why did the writer choose this particular text type? Why is it a novel and not a short story? Why is it a drama and not a poem? Why that particular text type? What makes it effective? And then what stylistic choices has the writer made that are relevant to that particular text type? What you don't want to do is at length elaborate on the writer and how the year that she wrote this book, she was really depressed because X, Y, or Z. Don't worry about the writer's mental state. That is not, you can't really know, and it's not really our business. You're exploring the text as it stands. The writer's context might be of some influence on the text, but it's not the focus of your discussion questions. Likewise, don't spend your time summarizing at length the plot of, I've written poem here. Clearly, it should not say poem, but text. Let me rephrase that. Let me fix that up. So that you don't spend any time exploring, or any long time exploring, what the subject matter is. Use that as a tool to explore the ideas of the text. So how is all this assessed then? Well, we're using 6 marking criteria, and criterion A, criterion B, criterion C, and criterion E are really about knowledge of the text, right? A and D is really about how well you know the meaning of the text and the implications, and how well you can analyze and think for yourself about the text. B is about how well you can explore how the writer has made specific choices in technique to develop the ideas that you've mentioned in response to criterion A. And criterion E is about how well you respond to your teacher's questions. So how relevant are your responses? So all of these are about how well you know the text, and you can practice these you can, as much as you possibly have time for, with your peers, with your teacher, and of course on your own with some sort of recording device, or just sitting at home in your room and answering questions and exploring the text on your own. The good thing about these 4 criteria is that the teacher can help you elucidate more information and really ask questions that allows you to show how well you know the 2 texts before you. So they can help you here to ask the right kind of questions to get you the best possible grade. So you have a little bit of leeway here in that you can have that assistance. However, for criterion C, which is how well you structure your commentary, and F, the language and the register that you employ to speak about the text, there is no help for you here. You need to get this right the first time around. So really, in your preparation, you need to focus a bit extra on criterion C and on criterion F, because the teacher cannot help you to get that extra mark in those 2 criteria. So let's have a closer look at those. So if we start with the structure of your commentary, the first part of the assessment, the first 8 minutes, you can almost think of this as in terms of what marks you're aiming for. If you're aiming to get just a 3 out of 5 in criterion C, then it's really enough to have a thesis and build that thesis. If you're looking at getting a 4, then you really need to be building an argument around that thesis, and really to get up into the 5s, you need to have a persuasive, cohesive argument that is going to convince the listener that your reading is a feasible and viable one. So once you've got an idea of what you're going to say, you need to signpost that idea in the introduction. Say, here's my main thesis, and this is how I'm going to unpack that. And then maintain that signposting. So say, okay, now I'm moving on to my second idea that I mentioned in the introduction, which is going to be this one. And then when you finish that idea, then you say, and now we're moving on to the third component, which is this. So that you clearly hold that argument together. And that you incorporate and build the references, the textual analysis, and the precise references. So you say, well, in line 3, this hyperbole of X really builds my thesis because of whatever the reason is. So that you build your references in, and the analysis becomes part of your argument. And then at the end, 8 minutes, or around the 8-minute mark, you need to have a distinct conclusion. So you bring your argument together so that it becomes holistic and it becomes persuasive, and it signals to the moderator that yes, this person has really thought about ending their commentary, but it also signals to your teacher that now you are ready for the 2 minutes of question. So they're not sitting there in a limbo waiting for you to conclude. So instead of drawing it out, just conclude and say, I'm now ready for questions, so that your teacher knows it's time to start asking those questions, because you want to use those last 2 minutes as effectively as you can. One last note on structure for the commentary: avoid linear unpacking. So just going in line 1, there's a simile, in line 2, there's a metaphor, in line 3, there's a hyperbole, unless you have in your introduction said, I need to go through this poem in a linear fashion because of the way the ideas develop. And then you need to still come back to your thesis throughout your commentary. In terms of the discussion component, there is no official requirement for structuring your response. However, if you look at the marking criterion and look at criterion E, you will see that in order for you to access the higher marks, your responses to your teacher's questions must be relevant, well-informed, and persuasive. In order to do that, you really need to show a clear structure in terms of what you are saying and how what you're saying, what you're outlining is persuasive. So what I would suggest there is that you clearly respond to the question by paraphrasing it. If the teacher is asking you, who do you perceive is the central minor character, then in your response, you want to just reverse that question and say, in my opinion, the most important minor character in this play is Ophelia, because, and then you outline your main argument. That becomes your topic sentence in what then becomes sort of a mini paragraph. You build that up then with specific textual references, where scenes where Ophelia plays a vital role as a minor character, maybe some quotes, but also some technical aspects, right? So the symbolism of her bringing lots of flowers adds to her importance because, or whatever the ideas might be, so that you build a mini paragraph in response to the question. And that paragraph or that response should probably be about 2 to 3 minutes per question. You don't want to go longer than that because then you're droning on. Be precise, be relevant, and be detailed. But once you feel that that's it, then you stop and you let your teacher ask you the next question. So, excuse me, it is important to have a personal interpretation, because if you look at the marking grid, you'll see that personal interpretation is important here. And it's often fruitful to have a kind of a resistant reading here, so that you don't necessarily go for the mainstream ideas. But maybe, for instance, you could explore that Hamlet is a foil to the true hero of the play, Fortinbras, because that's unexpected, that's not the mainstream reading of the play, but it's certainly something that you could explore in quite an interesting way. Or if you're reading The Great Gatsby, you could say that by the end of Fitzgerald's novel, the reader is positioned to favour conservatives like Tom over upstarts like Gatsby, and then build an argument around that sort of idea. Because that allows you to show that, yep, I'm clearly thinking independently here, and it allows you to show that you really understand the text. Obviously, your reading has to be one that you can support with evidence from the text still. Lastly, let's have a look at criterion F. This is where the assessor is looking at your language use and looking at it from 3 different angles. We are looking at how correct your language is your grammar, your word choices, and your sentences correct and complete. How appropriate your register is. So are you using the right level of formality, or is your language too colloquial or too stiff and too formal, which is possible, though very rare. And how precise is your expression? Are you using the appropriate terms to describe the elements that you're trying to describe? So what does that mean? Well, for you, in terms of you can't really do much on the day of the assessment to fix this, but it's something that you can certainly work on in your preparation. So in the months leading up to your assessment, seek to employ a semi-formal register when you're conversing with your peers, right? If in the corridors waiting for class, if you can express yourselves formally and try to be precise and try to speak in complete sentences, then that is going to prepare you for this assessment task where you want to be prepared to speak formally as well. Excuse me. The other thing you can do in terms of your everyday speech is try to eliminate the fillers. It's so easy for us to slip in those little likes and sorts of and kinds of, when we speak to our friends or when we speak to our parents, but that is going to harm you in terms of your register, right? Your language is going to be too colloquial if you do that throughout the assessment. So try to eliminate those before you get to the IOC assessment. And the next thing you can do is try to avoid imprecise diction. Words like good or bad or very or really before an adjective doesn't really add much meaning. So instead, if you can find the precise word of what you're trying to say, then that's probably going to help you. So for instance, if you can say, instead of saying, I think this is a very good play, instead if you're trying to say, what is it that's very good about it? Is it relatable? Is it disturbing? Is it realistic? Is that what makes it such a pleasant experience to read this particular text? Or instead of saying that this character is very bad, if you can say they're deplorable or they're despicable or they're inhuman, what is it that makes them, in your opinion, bad characters? Then that way, or is it the way that they're constructed? Are they poorly written? So the more precise your diction is, the more marks you will score in criterion F.
So hopefully that basic overview has given you an idea of what we teachers and markers expect from your performance in the individual oral commentary. If there are other aspects that you'd like me to explore in future, don't hesitate to let me know, because this is definitely, in my opinion, the most intimidating task that you do in the diploma program, or in the literature course at least. So you really need to practice, right? You need to practice this task, this skill, the commentary skill, pretty much from the start of your first year of the diploma, year 11, and really use that year and a half or 2 years, depending on when your school runs those assessments, but really use all the time you have to improve your register, to improve your pronunciation, to improve your analysis skills and your performance under pressure. So that because this task, it is a one-off, you can't do it again, and you've got to get it right. So make sure you practice annotation and commentary of text as much as you can. Best of luck, and let me know if I can help in future.